Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Omari Martin, Board Chair of KeplerCollege of the Astrological Arts and Sciences, and I want to welcome each of you to the Black History Month interview series. And today we have Sam Reynolds with us as an interviewee. I just want to share some information with you about his bio. So Sam Reynolds is a former skeptic who, after a life-changing visit to an astrologer, has spent 30 years doing charts and studying astrology. He is a former board member for the International Society for Astrological Research and the Astrology News Service, and he's a co-founder of the International Society of Black Astrologers. He is president and a faculty member for the International Academy of Astrology. He's written for multiple print and online outlets, including ebony.com and New York Magazine. So with that, let's welcome Sam, and it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and I also want to add, I'm a faculty member and president for the International Academy of Astrology.
Okay, yes, I thought I said that, but okay, great. And if I understand, it's okay. And if I understand it, you are the first African-American president of the International Academy of Astrology. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, I am.
Okay, and everyone, for the sake of transparency, please know Sam Reynolds and I are fraternity brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Yes, excellent. So with that, Sam, let's proceed. So how did you get started as an astrologer?
I got started going to, well, the long story, making it short, is that I wanted to set up a Gemini who I had a crush on. And she felt because I'm born on the cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius, November 22nd. And she felt I was a Scorpio. And I felt I was more an arachnid, I'm sorry, more of an archer than an arachnid. Now, it's like, if I have to choose between the centaur and the arachnid, clearly I'm more the centaur. She's like, no, you're the bug. You're the Scorpio. So I was looking for an occult book that, my mom had taken away from me when I was a teenager. And this is before Amazon. This is actually 1990, 91. And I went to, I went into the yellow and white pages and just went through bookstores. And this one bookstore I called in North Philly, because I was going to school at Temple University, had it. And so I went up there and got the book, and the guy started talking to me. He's like, oh, you ever had your chart done? My astrology chart. And I was like, no. He's like, oh, well, you might want to get that done. And then I was like, oh, that might be a way to shut, Geneva up about, astrology, about, being a Scorpio. So I said, okay, sure. I had some extra cash. And so I got this reading. And I got to tell you, for the first 15 minutes or so, I thought it was complete BS, because he said some obvious things, like, if you've met me in person, I'm pretty short. And he's like, oh, it looks like there's some challenges, probably related to your birth. And I was like, yeah, I'm statistically, a non-conformist height for a man. And he's like, oh, well, it looks like you're pretty smart. I was like, I just told you I was a PhD student. Now, I didn't say any of these things because my mama raised me right. But I'm like, okay. Then he also said, well, you're a Scorpion. I was like, oh, this is BS right there. And then the key thing that started me flowing is that he started talking about some details related to my family and family dynamics that went beyond the pale of guesswork. So I was like, how do you know that? I kind of broke through my impassive facade, because I was just listening. And he's like, oh, it's right here. You look at here, your son. And like, none of this made sense to me. So I decided it was some kind of gimmick, some kind of way in which he, got this. And lo and behold, I met a friend who was born the same exact day. I didn't know that, as I am, who was into astrology. She lent me her books, and then I started reading more and more. And then eventually got an astrology program, started doing charts with the aspiration of really kind of debunking astrology. Like, I was just waiting for someone to say, like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Yep, I knew it doesn't make any sense, shouldn't make any sense, because I couldn't understand how astrology could work.
Yeah.
So, I kept doing that for 10 years, only to discover that, I was way deep into astrology until someone really asked me at a party one day. So this is at, 2000. I had moved to New York. He's like, well, he was a skeptic. And he was like, but you don't really believe in it, do you? And I was like, yeah, I believe I do. And that was kind of the thing where I was like, well, let me proceed more with studying it,
Mm.
with more intensity, with people, especially since I
Okay.
was in an environment where I could be exposed to more astrologers. It was harder in Philly at the time, but
Okay, at the time.
at the
Okay. Yeah, in New York, is just a melting pot in and of itself with certainly more resources and stores. And so along those same lines, were you able to find access to courses when you were learning astrology? And, did you feel welcome in those courses as a Black man?
so um how I found out about more of those courses is I picked up a flyer, NCGR, and this is again around 2000, 2001,
Hmm.
more so 2000, used to put and print out flyers for upcoming events, and then they would have listings for classes. Now, at that point, I had been 10 years into my study. I wanted to do more, and I saw rectification. And I had read in one of my books about rectification.
Okay.
So I went to this astrologer, Julian Armistead, on the Upper West Side, called him up. There's a longer story with that because he was quite a character. And he agreed to see me, and I felt no prejudice or issues with him. He was a white astrologer.
Okay.
But he said something very profound to me, which I now subsequently have shared with other students since. He asked me a series of questions because I was like, I thought I could learn rectification in one lesson. He told me what the fee was.
Mm.
And then he said, well, the problem with you, because you've been studying, I don't know what you don't know. And I was like, what do you mean? And I don't know if I said that because again, my mama raised me right, but I'm thinking like, well, what don't I know? He said, well, maybe you might want to check out this conference that's happening and, get more of your grounding related to astrology.
Mm.
And it was at that conference, it was in New York, I guess seasonal conference they would have in the fall and spring. And I went there. I was the only Black person to my knowledge there. I don't remember seeing anybody. Um, and I had two powerful encounters that really helped me and shape some measure my trajectory in astrology. One was with Robert Zoller. Robert Zoller was speaking, and in a room full of white people, Robert Zoller said, well, we owe a great deal to the Moors and essentially to Black people while we were almost essentially in caves, and bringing astrology back. I literally looked around just to see like if anyone was going to take issue with what this man had just said, because I couldn't believe this white man, Robert Zoller's white,
Yeah.
just said in front of all these people what I knew as someone with 2 degrees in African American studies. So I was like, oh, I
Oh,
gotta pay
okay.
attention to this man.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I really did talk to him afterwards, and he told me about a course that he had developed in terms of medieval astrology. So that was very powerful for me.
Mm.
And then as I was leaving to go for lunch and we were having a break, I got on the escalator and there were 3 white women ahead of me. And as soon as I got on, one of them I saw do a thing, a regular scene. I just didn't expect it there, where she looked back and grabbed her purse and turned it around to the side, where I'm just
Mhm.
like, well, damn, I'm like at the top of the escalator. You're basically at the bottom. I mean, I'm yay high. I don't know if I'm any danger to you, but it was just interesting. I was like, oh, they see
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was my first encounter. Now, the good news is that I became friends eventually with that woman. I don't think I ever shared with her. That was my initial encounter
Mm.
with her. But that was kind of my introduction into, classes and community. And from there, that's when I went for my certification with NCGR.
Okay. Interesting. And I will say I too have had that experience, in particular with white women, holding their purses closer, and little, does she know or any of them know that they'd have to have at least $1 million of gold bricks in the purse before I would even think about taking it. And since $1 million worth of gold bricks will never fit in a purse that a woman carries, I will never do that. I have never thought about it. But
Right.
brother, I get it, and I feel you. So who are your biggest inspirations in astrology? And were there accessible Black astrologer role models for you at that time when you were coming up through the ranks?
Short answer, no. There were no accessible Black astrologers I knew of. I eventually found books from Black astrologers or people who wrote on astrology. One of them was Black Signs and Black Love Signs by Thelma Balfour,
Mhm.
but I never met Miss Balfour.
Okay.
And I don't think I encountered too many other people, especially in New York, who had, done astrology. Now, one thing to know, the first two astrologers I did meet in Philly were Black astrologers. So I went to North Philly. That's probably a key part, is that my first astrologer was Black. My second astrologer was Black, a woman, Rabia.
Mhm.
But by the time I moved to New York and I had matured and grown in my studies, I was out of touch with them.
Okay.
So they weren't as much in my life. But the people who kind of helped shape some measure of my astrology were Marion March and I'm blanking on the first name for Evers.
Yeah, Marcia McEvers. Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about. Hold on, I got the book right here. Marion D. March and Joan McEvers. Those are
Joan
the ladies.
McEvers,
And
thank you.
I'm envious of you that you actually met one of them or both of
Well,
them.
only their books, and then it was
Only their books. Okay.
only their books, and then it was also Derek and Julia Parker, and their book was instrumental. But in terms of accessible astrologers, it was New York astrologers John Marcasella, Mark Woltz. They were among my teachers. Then Alan Oken, who I did study with for 2-3 years. And one of the reasons why I'm in Santa Fe now is I first came out here for some week-long event he had organized and got a sense of this place. And he brought together various other astrologers, some Sandy Bryan, Heather. Why am I blanking on Heather's last name? I'll have to look at it. She just came out with Star Codes Astro. I'm going to say Heather Murphy, but that is not right. I know that Heather Roan Robbins. Here we go.
Okay. All right.
So I got to know her. And then in terms of a big hero, and I talk about this a lot, it would be Rob Hand. And I have had the opportunity to work and study with Rob Hand a few times, and hang out with him, including in 2015 when I was in South Africa. And he was doing a series of daily lectures there in South Africa. And then afterward, we hang out with him and be able to pick his brain and ask him particular questions. So I've been lucky to have some direct teachers. And like I said, I met Robert Zoller and then I studied his course. Christopher Warnock is also someone I've studied with.
Mhm.
So I've been blessed with some good teachers.
Excellent. Yes, I know. I've met Dr. Rob Hand, and I know the name Robert Zoller, but I never met that gentleman. So, so what kind of support did you have when you decided to go into astrology? Like from your family, a significant other, friends? How did they support you?
I did have a significant other, a girlfriend at the time. When I started making the transition, I had moved to New York to pursue a life as an actor. And I was also a tech trainer, during the day and an actor by night. But I kept up with my studies with astrology. And I had, when I was thinking about getting out of acting and trying to figure out the next thing I would do, she said, well, you really love astrology. Why don't you look into becoming an astrologer? So I think that also directed me toward looking into rectification, and then rectification led me to looking for classes, and then getting those classes and getting support and along that trajectory to go for certification.
Mhm.
So I had that kind of support. My my mom had already passed, so I didn't have support from her, but I think I would have. But my father was open to, anything I wanted to do. He didn't necessarily put a lot of stock in it, but he also didn't poo-poo it. So when I started making the transition into becoming an astrologer, he was like, as long as I was happy, it was fine. And then I found more of a community online. This is like, now we're going more into 1998, 99, when I moved to New York. So by the time we get to 2000, 2001, I'm on MySpace. And going into, more things with MySpace and starting to meet people like Chris Brennan. And this is more so 2002, 2003. After I, initially get on and start finding out where I can actually find more astrologers.
Mhm.
So Chris Brennan, Patrick Watson, Nick Dagan Best, I also started encountering. I did finally meet another Black astrologer who was based in Philly. His name was Moomin Bey, or is Moomin Bey. I think he's changed his name since. And, we started having conversations, debates, discussions. It was the first round of, as we were sharing what we knew, and arguing about it. This is also where I met Gary Caton
I
and
know
was
that name.
arguing with Gary, having huge fights with Gary. I say that now because we are good friends now. We moved through that. But yeah, that was like my first forays into, learning more about things I didn't know beyond even some measure. And I was going through the certification process with NCGR. I went to level 3. And then in 2008, I went out to the blast that Moses Sirigar had organized, and that was the first
I've heard of that.
big encounter with other astrologers, Robert Blaschke, who also has been a powerful influence, and
Mhm.
other people I met there. So that's been part of the community I've been building. Michelle Gould, who's been instrumental in helping to advance to different dimensions of my career. Barry Perlman. So
Mhm.
these were people who, I got to know. Ben Commons as well on a personal level. Now, you might say, like, well, how many of them were Black? Very few. Um, I lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Bed-Stuy at that time.
Mhm.
And I knew people who were interested in astrology. I, was having a growing clientele of astrologers. But often when I met other Black or people into astrology, they either belong like to us, the SAR set society, where they're like, well, are you sidereal, my brother? And I'm like, no. And I was still trying to figure out what sidereal astrology was.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
interesting how that's made a big comeback. That's another conversation. So by the time I get into I don't know what we call 2010 to 20, that decade. By the
Mhm.
time I get in that decade, I started meeting more astrologers online and more on Facebook.
Okay.
So, and I started meeting more Black astrologers. So it's pretty much during that time frame that I met the co-founder of the International Society of Black Astrologers. Other people who kind of have a name out there, Ra Akul, who created his own kind of cosmophysics
Mhm.
astrology.
Yes.
Who, also in terms of, the brother that we also have talked about doing the conference with.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I started meeting more people. Initially arguments and discussions.
Is that a Scorpio trait? I don't know. I'm not beating up. Is that a Scorpio trait?
I don't know if it's a Scorpio trait. I mean, it sounds like that hasn't been your modus operandi. It seems to follow me, or I follow it. Take your pick. It's kind of like Highlander. There can only be one. And then we kind of, I don't know if you found this. It sounds like you haven't. You've been more collaborative, but I do find, sidebar related, and I think we can have a conversation like this. I do find that sometimes among Black male astrologers, I don't think we always kind of get together and coordinate. Sometimes there's some, you know,
A little friction. Okay, all right.
have you
So
experienced that or not? Or maybe that is a Scorpio.
yes, I have. And from the space of love, my good brother, my good fraternity alpha brother, I experienced that with you. So don't be looking around. Yeah, you, Sam Reynolds.
When did I have a
So
fight with you, Mark? I don't remember.
okay. Hold on. So we met at the ESAR conference in 2009.
Yeah.
And I was excited to just meet another Black male astrologer, and we did exchange contact information. And I remember reaching out to you 2 to 3 times after the conference, and I never heard back from you. And I remember, I think at the conference you were talking about Jupiter, maybe not in general, but maybe in a specific sun sign or alignment or whatever the case may have been. And for myself, after I reach out to someone 2 or 3 times with, email or a phone call, if I don't hear back from the person in maybe, 30 days, I'm complete. I just have it that this is an individual who either does not want to communicate with me or is too busy to follow up with me at that time. So I was, and I just held it right there. And I wasn't angry or upset, just a little disappointed. But as the universe would have it, here we are, and we're connected.
I don't remember. I remember meeting you at the Friends of
Astrology, at the Friends of Astrology
I remember
library,
meeting
correct?
you. Right.
Yes, that's when we met.
I'm horrible with contact, so yes, that I own that. I'm sure that sounds like and I'm sorry for that. But we didn't have a conflict. I mean, like to my
Right. No, there was no conflict, and that was just a communication miss, if you will. And that does happen between people. And I get it. And it was clear to me, yes, you are a professional astrologer. You have clients, students, you may have been taking classes, and maybe for all I know, you had a 9 to 5 job. So I just recognized in the moment you were busy. But again, as the universe would have it, here we are some years later, 10 plus years later, and we are having this conversation, and we have been in communication now for the past 3 to 4 years directly with a text, or we see one another at a conference or what have you. So it's great. All love, brother, all love.
Yeah. So yeah, I think well that's good. Like I said, I do apologize for not getting back with you because I'm just like, wow, he reached out to me. Wow, okay. I just met a friend of yours who did reach out to me. So if he's watching this, I am gonna reach back. But yeah,
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
it's an interesting
And
moment.
he's a good brother too. He's a good brother.
Is he frat too? He doesn't have
No,
to.
he's not frat.
Okay, that's fine. It doesn't have to be. I was just curious, like, oh, it'd be like, oh, happy one alpha family. But yeah, I think the thing I'm talking about too, though, is not just this missed communications, missed opportunities, which we certainly have, but there's sometimes a bit of contention that we have.
Yeah, I agree. I come from the space of we can all eat.
I agree.
That's the space I come from. We can all eat. And if I can support you in some way inside of your career as a professional astrologer out of the gate, I'm willing to do that. And but I don't, and I recognize the all do not share that philosophy that I hold, and now I know you hold. And that's okay, because we are all at choice in the matter. But I think we as a group could accomplish more in our service to humanity by being united and cooperating inside of and for a common cause, and not just for Black men and Black women, but all Black and brown people and white people, and for humanity as a whole.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Okay. Now, what kinds of changes, if any, have you experienced in the course of your career in terms of feeling welcome in groups of different diversity and cultures?
Well, some of that I have been, I would say, instrumental in helping to foster. Some of it has nothing to do with me and just has become its own blossoming of greater exposure. So I'll talk about the latter first. So I think the World Wide Web has helped to bring more people who have an interest in astrology together. And by virtue of that, being able to share and not feel like, especially within the Black community, like a freak or a pariah, because you may be into the devil's thing or whatever.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
this because of strong aspects of religiosity and culture, and I'll talk about the culture piece in just a second. There are many African Americans who felt like they couldn't embark upon an astrological career, either, as an avocation or vocation. And that could be, again, for religion. And when I say culture, it may be in some dimensions related to class, because we haven't had the breathing room to do that. It's like, well, there's some people, for instance, let's be blunt. There are a good number of white women who got into astrology in the 60s, 70s, into 80s. And I've heard this from white women, so it's not something I'm making up, who had partners who had lucrative jobs, and they could afford to kind of get into astrology.
Yes.
And then build it toward, more of a vocation.
Yes.
And then, or had jobs themselves, as affirmative action has also been a great boon and benefit for white women. So many of them made the first forays into astrology in the 60s and 70s and onward. So that took us a little longer because, if you have to choose between trying to get up in corporate America or secure a steady job, and then also trying to survive related to astrologer, it may take more time, especially when you're dealing with the competing interests related to racism and all the delays and different things that can happen with that. So it became a matter of time where it could be enough, quote unquote, leisure for more Black people to get involved and acquire the skill sets to be able to make a living or even be present in astrology.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of one particular thing that is happening and has happened, especially with some measure of acceleration in the last 10 years. I remember going to UAC 2012 and not seeing many Black faces at all, as versus going 2018 and seeing a good smattering of a lot more.
Yes. Yes.
And so that has been its own thing. I think the other accelerator that I've helped contribute to is working with NORWAC as one particular, what was a regional conference, still a regional conference, but casting the net farther, not just in terms of race, but also gender, sexual orientation, and other things for those in financial need. What the astrology community started to see that diversity could become a strength. And the mindset I directly encountered when I was working with like ESAR was like, well, it will happen naturally, which it wasn't happening naturally at that time. And the other counterpoint that others would say is like, well, it's not like we're hanging a sign out on the doors that no Blacks allowed or no gays or anybody. So we're not prohibiting, but we also were not inviting.
Yeah,
so I think
great distinction. Great distinction. Yes, thank you.
So what I think NORWAC showed other institutions, like if you put out the call, others will answer, and people started answering.
Yes.
And started seeing, I guess, concomitant with, the growing forces of the World Wide Web, more people coming to virtual events, we saw this explosion. And then since the pandemic, when more people were basically under house arrest at home, and had to kind of learn online, we saw even a greater proliferation of people into astrology. So now we're seeing more diversity and more presence. Now, there were other pioneers, Jethro Love, Dr. Ronald Tiggle. We would be remiss if we also didn't mention Demetrius Bagley. There's a good number of people who've been instrumental in pushing this forward, who've been a smattering of us. here and there, but I think the larger aspects of diversity has kind of come in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree. And I just want to add, I remember UAC 2018. I was there, yes, because it was in Chicago. And that is where I saw I'll just say it, Marie O'Neill, as a Black woman speaking at an international astrology conference. And I was very pleased to see that. And over the past 5 years or so, I've seen more Black women in astrology at the professional level
Yes.
than I have in the past when I started coming up through the ranks or entered the profession. And so with that, what message of inspiration would you like to share with new and upcoming astrologers of color?
I would say a couple things. One, there's no such thing as astrology. There is something that we could call astrologies, meaning, I don't mean as a language, but astrologies with the IES. There's various forms of astrology. So learn them, be open. Don't be too quick to just limit yourself in one form of astrology, whether that's evolutionary, psychological astrology, traditional astrology. Be bold in your experimentation and be open in that. The other thing is, I think it requires some measure of boldness for us to acknowledge our presence in, yes, with what has been a largely white space. But one, it's recognizing that there are a good number of people, good people who are willing to accept you. You may occasionally have people who have their own lingering prejudices they may or may not be aware of, but your job is to keep doing you, keep advancing, keep pushing, and build on your sense of connection with others. Omari just kind of expressed one of my failures, right? Which was not in keeping connection. No, and I think it's a real lesson in not keeping in connection with you, although we found a roundabout way to do it. And I think our strength is in making, connections and not getting too hung up on our differences. I mentioned a number of people I fought with, like Ever Reese was the other brother I wanted to mention, who I did kind of allude to in terms of a potential conference. Started off with, fight with him. But, one of the things I will say, get on the damn phone. Don't just stick to arguments you do online.
Right.
Saying, like, can we have a conversation? Because a lot can be worked out if you get to know a person as a person.
Yes.
And that was true, like most of the people I've talked about with arguments. I just had I hope, and it sticks as a healing conversation. I've had a ongoing sense of debates and arguments with someone online, some things related to astrology, and we just had to get on the phone with each other. And a lot of clarity came on talking on the phone. Or if you're in the same city, meet in person.
Yeah.
I think fostering real connection, especially with us as brothers and sisters, we're talking about between Black astrologers, people of color. I think that becomes important because this is something that has been sorely lacking in the tradition. You might say, like, well, there were plenty of people of color, from ancient Egypt to all the way in Babylonia. I'm talking about in the Western tradition, where I might open a book by William Lilly, and he's describing someone with flaxen hair and pale of complexion. Who is he talking about?
Yeah. Yes.
He's not necessarily talking about, people who look like me and you.
That's right.
So I think it becomes instrumental and necessary for us to add to the tradition, research, make connections, foster relationships, and I think we can grow.
Love that. I have experienced that as well, where you see a white author of an astrology cookbook, and they talk about sun signs and certain descriptions. And I could clearly discern, well, this person certainly isn't referencing Black and brown people or those of African descent, So I recognize I'd have to weed that out, if you will, and stay focused on the other components of that that were less subjective, if you will. So I get it. I know I get it. I clearly get that. And so, so what kinds of shifts in the astrological community do you think would improve opportunities for Black astrologers?
Hmm. For more organizations to offer scholarships if they have the resources to do so. To And I think it does require a little more work, especially for more seasoned, maybe we could say even older astrologers, and authors, to kind of reach out and broaden their base and broaden their connection to, clientele. And color doesn't make you immune from this. And let me explain. When I say it doesn't make you immune, when I started having more of a regular practice in the early 2000s, roughly, like I said, roughly around 2002, 2003, I had a friend who actually, I'll just say this, a woman. I mean, obviously she's a woman, but your lighter brown eyes and your face remind me of her. Her name
Okay.
came to visit me. So when I was looking at you, like, oh, he looks like Lorenza. Like Lorenza could be your sister.
Oh, wow, cool.
But Lorenza came to visit me, and we were close friends, from Philly. And she observed people who were coming to visit me. She was staying with me. And they were largely white. And he's like, "Do you have any Black clientele?" And I was like, "Well, I guess really no." And that was surprising. I hadn't even thought about it. Here I have 2 degrees in African American studies, and I was like, "Well, what do I need to do to reach more Black people?" And I thought about it, and then I got proactive. One of the ways I ended up in Bed-Stuy is I went to Bed-Stuy. I know where was a good number of Black people, and started putting up flyers and making connections. Next thing you know, I got because I was living in Williamsburg, which is Latino and mainly white.
Mhm.
Not a good number of Black people there that I remember. And so that became like a second, well, eventually did become my home for a
Okay.
while. And it's kind of more the reaching out. So I think sometimes it's, you don't have to do anything like, here's a picture of Dr. King, and I'm having a special. You don't have to do anything gimmicky,
Right.
but it could be more so just going to places, or in terms of talking to friends or people of, like, I would like to work with any Black clientele or people of color. I don't want to limit to just Black people, but anybody of color.
I understand. And so, brother, you've made a reference to your 2 degrees in African American studies. Would you just share a few more details? Bachelor's of Art, Bachelor's of Science, Master's. Would you just share a little more information about that? And the reason I say that is because for Black people, education has always been one of the golden keys to economic mobility or upward economic mobility. And you've referenced them in a general sense, but would you just share a little more details? And I did hear you say you were a former PhD candidate. So say more about that as well for the benefit of the audience and especially Black and Brown people.
Absolutely. So I have a Bachelor's of Arts from Syracuse University in 2 areas. One is African American Studies, the other is Public Relations from the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. So I was actually dually enrolled in 2 different schools at the university, 2 different colleges. And then my graduate degree, I have a master's in African American Studies from Temple University, where I was ABD, a PhD student, but I dropped out. I dropped out of the program, had problems in the program with some of my advisors. And I felt like I didn't want a life in academia. So I decided to step away from academia, pursue more of my creative life, as I talked about, in terms of poetry and acting. And so that's pretty much it. That's how I didn't get my PhD. And that's fine. I mean, it was interesting. Just recently, I was thinking, man, should I go back and get my PhD? But I don't know.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm gonna say yes. I would certainly encourage you to complete your PhD. I get it. I'm a PhD candidate now myself. And so my area is accounting, and I knew going into it not to expect for a Black or brown person to serve on my dissertation committee, and that is in fact the case. My committee members are great, having a great experience inside of that, but they're white, so I get it. And one is a woman, so that's some variation, if you will.
Sure.
And for those who are watching, it's only appropriate for me to add that, and Sam touched on this earlier, that for astrology organizations and school to offer diversity scholarships. Kepler College offers a diversity scholarship for which anyone who is a member of a historically underrepresented group, you qualify for the scholarship, and I, as the board chair of Kepler College, encourage you to apply. So Sam,
Yes, sir.
how do you celebrate Black History Month? Do you do anything special?
It depends on where I am and what's going on. So I can't remember doing anything special last year, other than, occasionally doing what I do most of the year, is sending something off on Twitter.
Mhm.
But this Friday, I'm attending a Black History event. I like going to different events for Black History Month. But no, I don't do anything, special per se.
Okay. And what kinds of services are you providing right now to your clients and your students?
So I just finished a round of classes, Nitty Gritty 3, which is more exploring horary and electional astrology, and Nitty Gritty 1, which is my basic class, which I won't be offering either one probably again until the fall. Getting ready to offer perhaps a new thing, Nitty Gritty 4, which is going to be more about learning to calculate and do charts by hand.
Yes.
And with my clients, I offer services in natal astrology, predictive astrology, kind of what's kind of coming up, horary, electional, astrocartography. So I think these are among my specializations.
Excellent. And Sam, tell us how people can find you.
So they can find me at unlockastrology.com, or write me at unlockastrology@gmail.com, or they can come on Twitter and find me at unlockastrology. And also on Instagram, it's S as in Sam, F as in Fred Reynolds. So SF Reynolds on Instagram. And Facebook, I'm Ebony Sky Talker is my page, because that was one of my handles on Twitter at one point, Ebony Sky Talker.
Okay, love it, love that. And I also want to say I love that you use that combination lock for unlock astrology, and the astrology symbols are the numbers to unlock it. So I love that. I thought that was very creative, and unlock astrology, that's a perfect fit. And as your fraternity brother, I encourage you to register that with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office as a service mark.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we'll talk about it offline.
Okay.
So with that, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, the President, Donna Young, other administrators of the college, our faculty members and students, I say thank you, and be well, everyone. Talk to you next time.
Take care, everyone.